Good morning, Kern. This is a quick video to give you some feedback from the walkthrough that I was able to conduct last week with Dr. Byington. I enjoyed spending some time in classrooms at Kirn last week, and Dr. Byington and I had a great conversation about the things that you guys have been doing during professional development and your implementation of some of the best practices that you've been looking at in terms of student engagement. And so it was with that lens that Dr. Byington and I visited classrooms, specifically looking for strong examples of high student engagement. And one of the tools that we used was the IPI, or Instructional Practices Inventory, which identifies a scale from 1 to 6 to address the level of student engagement in a classroom. And I can tell you that we were very pleased that most of the classrooms that we visited had IPI scores in the upper range, which meant that students were engaged in meaningful work in varying degrees. And in fact, we saw several classrooms where we had what we would consider active engagement of students, where students were really owning most of the learning and creating meaning from the instruction that they were receiving. So that's really positive as you move forward and continue your work on developing classrooms that are engaging for students. There's a couple of things I wanted to highlight, a couple of different classrooms. Two classrooms that we visited, our first couple of classrooms, really had an interesting opportunity for students to interact with each other and use our one-to-one initiative at the same time, and both were very engaging for students. And they were both social studies classrooms where the teachers were actually asking students to share in a joint journey in a web quest in their study of Canada. And in my conversations with students, a couple of things that I noticed were just some of the questions that they were asking themselves and each other that allowed them to inquire and dig deeper into the information. And then in another classroom, we saw the teacher using Kahoot to a student, actually it was a student developed Kahoot to identify some of the major features that they were studying about Canada. And it was a great way to engage students in interacting with the content that they were studying, as well as using our one-to-one initiative to further deepen student learning and help students create meaning from the content. In another classroom, we visited a couple of math classrooms where I was really pleased to see the level of engagement very high in some math classrooms. One of them we went to, students had taken a picture of a scarf that had many different colors, and each color had a number of rows that was assigned to it, and students had to use that diagram to create their own equations around how they would go about using that diagram and extrapolate the data from the diagram in order to make a prediction on how much yarn it would really take of each color mathematically to conduct that scarf. I had a conversation with these two gentlemen, and really it was a great opportunity for me to hear them talk about math in a deep and meaningful way, and they had a great relevant experience that they were able to tie their learning back to, and it really helped them make meaning of the content. In another math classroom, we saw students were working in stations, and really an opportunity for them to engage in some guided practice with the teacher. And the thing that really stood out to me about this example was the rigor of the learning outcomes for students. They were doing some heavy lifting with some math concepts, and they had the teacher there right along the way to kind of give them that extra dose of instruction as they worked through several of the stations. It was a great way to engage students through the stations, and the students enjoyed it as well. So I thought that was a great example, and one that is a great way to highlight what can be done when we pair productive group work and guided instruction together. In another English classroom we visited, students were getting ready to continue their work on a research project that they had been doing, and I had an opportunity to visit with this young man, and he provided some insight into some of the work that they had been doing on identifying strong resources, as well as using the internet to research and what appropriate internet research looks like. And he was actually doing his research on sports in the 1960s. And he had developed a couple of research questions that he was interested in. And one of the reasons I wanted to mention this to you was because of the power of the student interest when they're able to generate their own questions. And this was a great example of that. The student was highly motivated to dig into the research because he was studying something that was meaningful to him. So I thought that was a great example. One last example I wanted to share with you was also from a math class, and this was just a really interesting class where students were working in multiple groups, and they were doing an in-depth investigation around exponential growth. And just to hear the level of questioning that was going on in this room as students were grappling with how they could dissect from a table of values and make predictions based on a mathematical model was really a great testament to the planning that the teacher had done, coming up with an authentic opportunity for students to inquire, and it really helped students generate a deep meaning of the mathematical concept that they were working on for the day. We saw several other examples. Those are the ones that I wanted to highlight for you. I wanted to just leave you with a couple of observations and then a challenge as you move forward. I can see a lot of growth from my fall walkthrough to my spring walkthrough in student engagement. And it's obvious that you guys have taken a commitment to making sure that you're implementing the instructional model with fidelity, but you're using it as a framework that allows you to innovate within the framework to help really build meaning for students. And as you continue your professional development, I would encourage you to share in your collaborative planning teams and in your learning teams about what practices work well for you to engage students at high levels so that they are interested and that they are hungry to learn more from your instruction. Hopefully you guys have an opportunity to discuss some of this feedback at your next team meeting, and I look forward to the progress that Kirn is continuing to make, and thank you for the great work that you're doing for our kids every day.